The wind came from nowhere and everywhere, a solid thing born of grit and malice. It clawed at the Arizona plains, tearing the red dust from the earth and flinging it against the small, weather-beaten homestead. The sky, which had been a pale, hopeful blue an hour ago, was now a roiling, suffocating brown. Inside, Marietta pushed her thin frame against the warped window frame. The glass rattled, a high, desperate sound, like a trapped bird. She held a piece of split pine, salvaged from the woodpile, against the frame. Her other hand, clutching the hammer, was clumsy. She brought it down on the nail, missed, and struck her own knuckle. She bit back a curse, the taste of blood sharp and coppery on her tongue, mingling with the dust that already coated her teeth. She was pale, this widow, and the last year had whittled her down. Her late 20s felt like 50. Her hair, once the color of sun-baked wheat, was pulled back in a severe, joyless knot, grayed by the ever-present dust. She hammered the nail again. The wood split, but it held. It was always like this, holding things together with splintered wood and bruised knuckles. The wind moaned, finding a new crack beneath the door, whistling a tune of utter desolation. This farm was not a home. It was a daily battle. The roof leaked, the soil was stingy, and the well threatened to run dry every summer. Her husband, Elias, had believed in it. He had seen redemption in the stark, cruel beauty of the territory. Marietta just saw the bones of his failure. She moved to the next window, her shoulders aching. The cabin was only 2 rooms, but it felt like a fortress she was losing, inch by inch. The dust was a 5th column, invading from within. It settled on the cold stove, on the rough-spun blanket covering the bed, on the tiny, carved wooden bird Elias had made for their son, Samuel. She finished the last board just as the heart of the storm hit. The world outside dissolved. It was not dark, not yet, but the sun was choked out, replaced by an angry, vibrating twilight. The cabin groaned. Marietta sank onto the 3-legged stool by the empty hearth, her hands dropping into her lap. She was too tired to light the lamp. She just sat and listened to the assault, feeling the tiny vibrations of the cabin as it fought to stand. The wind always brought the dreams. When the storm finally quieted, hours later, leaving a strange, damp silence in its wake, she did not move. She slept where she sat, her head falling forward onto her chest, a prisoner of exhaustion. The fire came first, not the warm, comforting fire of the hearth, but the greedy, orange kind. It smelled of lamp oil and panic. She was running, but her feet were heavy, stuck in the mud of the dream. The smell of whiskey, hot and sour on a man's breath. The splintering of the door. Then, the wail. Samuel. High and thin. A sound that should have shattered glass. A sound that begged. It was cut short. A thick, wet sound. Marietta's own mouth opened in the dream, but no sound came out. There was blood. It was not red in the firelight. It was black, slick and treacherous on the pine floorboards. She saw it on her own hands, though she hadn't touched anyone. And the scream. It was Elias. He was a quiet man. Elias, a man of shy smiles and stubborn faith. He was not a man built for screaming. But he screamed then. It was not a sound of pain, not entirely. It was a sound of ultimate betrayal, of a universe breaking apart, a sound of tearing. She woke with a jolt, her own throat raw, as if she had been the one screaming. The cabin was cold. The air was thick, not with smoke, but with the settled dust of the storm. Morning light, gray and weak, filtered through the cracks in her boarded-up windows. She pushed herself up, her joints cracking. The dream clung to her, a greasy residue. She could still smell the blood. She scrubbed her hands on her apron, a useless, repetitive motion. The storm had passed. The air outside was scoured clean, smelling of wet creosote and ozone. The world looked new and broken. A fence post was down. The chicken coop's door was swinging on one hinge. She went out, the shotgun heavy in her arms. She checked the coop first. The hens were frantic but alive, huddled in the corner, feathers askew. It was near the shed that she saw them. The storm had washed the yard clean, leaving the damp, packed earth vulnerable. and in that earth were tracks. They were not her own small, worn boot prints. They were not the heavy, hobnailed tracks of the men from Jericho Creek. These were lighter, the impression of a boot worn down to almost nothing, or perhaps a moccasin. They were careful. Her heart, which she thought had turned to stone, began a slow, heavy beat against her ribs. The tracks led from the rocky outcrop behind her land, circled the cabin, and stopped at the small shed where she kept her smoked meats and meager supplies. She pushed the shed door open. The lock, already weak, was broken. Inside, the cool darkness smelled of salt and hickory. She counted. 3 links of dried sausage were gone. A slab of jerky. She went back to the coop. She had 5 hens. She should have had 5 eggs. There were only 2. Someone was close. Someone was watching. Someone was stealing from her. The anger was cold and sharp. It was almost a relief. Anger was better than the hollow grief. Anger was useful. That night, she did not sleep. She sat in the dark, the shotgun across her knees. She had fixed the shed lock, but she knew it wouldn't matter. She waited. The hours dripped by. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. The silence of the plains was absolute. She heard the beat of her own blood. Then, a sound. A scrape. It came from the chicken coop. A soft clucking of alarm from the hens. Marietta was on her feet before she had time to think. She grabbed the lantern but did not light it. She moved through the darkness, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She eased the cabin door open. The night air was cold. She crept toward the coop, the shotgun feeling slick in her sweaty palms. She held her breath. She heard it again. A rustle, followed by a low, pained grunt. She kicked the coop door open, the one swinging on its hinge, and raised the shotgun. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Get out or I'll shoot!" The moonlight, thin as skim milk, cut into the small space. He was not what she expected. He was not a drunken settler or a desperate miner. He was an Apache. He was slumped against the far wall, among the nesting boxes, his body coiled in pain. One hand was clutched to his side. His face, all sharp angles and shadows, was turned toward her. His eyes were black holes in the dark. He tried to stand, to raise himself, but a shudder went through him. He looked down at his hand, then back at her. He was bleeding. A dark stain was spreading across his torn shirt, soaking into the straw-covered floor. He stared at her, not with fear, but with a kind of burning, animal assessment. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed sideways, scattering the terrified hens. Marietta stood frozen for a full minute. The chickens settled, their nervous clucking the only sound. He was dying. In her chicken coop. "Lord," she whispered, the word feeling foreign and useless. She looked back at her cabin. Safe, bolted. Then she looked at the man. If she left him, he would be dead by morning. The coyotes would find him. If she helped him, what then? She hated him. She hated him on principle. She hated the idea of him. It was his kind. His kind had burned her life to the ground. His kind had stolen the sound of her son's laughter from the world. She should leave him. It was justice. She stepped closer. The smell of him hit her. Sweat, dust, and the sick, metallic tang of blood. He was young, maybe her age. His face, in repose, was just a face. She touched his shoulder with the toe of her boot. He didn't move. "Damn you," she whispered. "Damn you for this." She put the shotgun down. Dragging him was the hardest thing she had ever done. He was not a large man, but he was dense with muscle, a dead weight. She was thin, and the grief had taken her strength. She grabbed him under the arms, her fingers digging into his flesh, and pulled. He left a trail in the dust. She dragged him across the yard, her breath coming in ragged sobs of exertion. She dragged him over the threshold of her cabin. The sound of his boots scraping the floorboards set her teeth on edge. She dropped him near the hearth, his head hitting the floor with a dull thud. She slammed the cabin door and threw the bolt. The heavy thud of the bar falling into place echoed in the small room. She stood with her back against the wood, panting, her heart trying to escape her chest. She had just locked herself inside with him. She stared at the body on her floor. What had she done? She contemplated it for a long time. She could still let him die. She could wait until he was cold, then drag him back out. No one would know, but she had already dragged him in. The choice had been made, somewhere between the coop and the door. She lit the lamp. The small flame threw huge, dancing shadows. She saw his face clearly now. He was covered in grime, his black hair matted with blood and dirt. She went to the basin and poured water from the pitcher. Her hands were shaking so badly the water sloshed onto the floor. She knelt beside him. She took a rag, dipped it, and hesitated. She started with his face, washing away the dirt, as if revealing the man underneath would tell her what to do. His skin was hot. She moved to the wound. She had to cut his shirt away. The rag was too small for this. The wound was a ragged, puckered hole in his side, a bullet wound. It was festering, the edges of it an angry purple. It looked to be 2, maybe 3 days old. As she washed the blood, her hand steadied, but her mind splintered. The water in the basin turned pink, then red. She remembered washing Samuel after he was born, his skin so perfect, so new. She remembered washing Elias for his coffin, his skin so cold, so wrong. And she remembered the floor, after scrubbing the floorboards on her hands and knees, trying to erase the black stains, the water in her bucket turning the same dark, sickening red as the water in the basin now. His kind, she thought again, the hatred bubbling up like bile. They did this, but this man, lying on her floor, his breath a shallow rasp, hadn't done it. Had he? It didn't matter. He was just bleeding. She couldn't bring herself to be cruel. She was too tired for that much hate. The grief had hollowed her out, and there was simply no room for it. She cleaned the wound as best she could. She had no whiskey for antiseptic, only a small tin of salve that she used for her cracked hands. She spread it on the wound. He didn't flinch. She bandaged him with a strip of linen torn from her own sparse supply. She sat back on her heels. The work was done. She had saved a life she wasn't sure was worth saving. She had brought the enemy into her home. She slept, fitfully. In the chair, the shotgun back across her lap. He woke near dawn. It was not a slow, groggy awakening. 1 second he was limp, the next his eyes were open, black and sharp, taking in the room, the ceiling, the light. He found her in the chair in an instant. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched her. The silence in the cabin was heavy, sharp as glass. It was a silence of 2 predators, or perhaps 2 victims, assessing each other. The fear was mutual. Marietta found her voice first. It was a dry croak. "What's your name?" He stared at her. His eyes moved from her face, down to the shotgun she was clutching, then back to her eyes. He seemed to be calculating. He glanced at the bandage on his side, then at her hands, still stained from his blood. He turned his head slowly to look at the door, measuring the distance. "I asked you your name," she said, louder this time, trying to sound brave. He looked at her for a long moment. He swallowed, his throat working. "Tohanu," he said. The word was low, guttural. It sounded like the rocks in the wind. It sounded foreign and dangerous in her small cabin. He did not say it again. He closed his eyes, and either slept or pretended to. Marietta did not go to Jericho Creek for supplies. She could not leave him, and she could not be seen. She remembered the last time she had gone, 2 weeks before, the whispers, the way the women in the mercantile pulled their children close when she passed. They had all known Elias. They had all known Samuel. They looked at her, the lone survivor, and their pity was laced with something dark, suspicion. They thought she was unnatural, cursed, perhaps even deranged. Sister Albright, the preacher's wife, had cornered her by the flour sacks. Her eyes were small and black, like currants. "Marietta, dear," she had said, her voice like dry corn husks. "We are praying for your soul. Such tragedy, such loss." Marietta had just nodded, wanting to flee. "But the Lord tests us." "Mrs." Albright continued, placing a dry hand on Marietta's arm. "And a woman alone. It is an invitation. You survived, when your husband and child did not." The insinuation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "The talk is not kind, Marietta. They say you are not right in the head. They say you do not mourn properly. Do not give them more reason. Keep your doors locked. Keep your heart locked tighter. Do not let the darkness into your home again." Marietta had pulled her arm away. Now, sitting in her cabin, staring at the man named Tohanu, Sister Albright's words echoed. She had let the darkness in, a literal darkness, in their eyes. If they knew, they would not just whisper. They would come with ropes or fire. Tohanu recovered slowly. He was a creature of silence. For 3 days, he did not speak again. He accepted the thin broth she made from her dwindling supplies, drinking it from the bowl with a quiet intensity. He slept, and when he was awake, he watched. He said nothing, but he observed everything. He observed the way she flinched when the wood popped in the stove. He saw the old, faded burn scar that wrapped around her left forearm, disappearing under her sleeve. He watched her talk to herself, or to the ghosts, her lips moving without sound as she kneaded bread. He saw the shame. He saw it in the way she scrubbed the floor where he had first bled, scrubbing it far harder and longer than was necessary. Her eyes squeezed shut. He saw it in the way she refused to meet his eyes for more than a second. She was a woman wrapped in silence and secrets, just as he was, on the morning of the 4th day. She woke in the chair to find him gone. The pallet she had made him by the fire was empty. Panic seized her. Had he hurt her? Had he stolen something? She stood up, her heart pounding. The cabin was empty. The door was unbolted. She grabbed the shotgun and ran outside. He was not stealing. He was at her front gate, the small picket gate Elias had built, the one the storm had knocked off its hinges. Tohanu was standing. Though he leaned heavily on the fence, he had found her hammer and a handful of nails. With slow, deliberate movements, he was fixing the gate. The sound of the hammer was steady, solid. It was a sound of building, not breaking. It was the first sound of order on this farm in a year. She watched him. He did not seem to notice her. He finished the last nail, tested the gate. It swung smoothly. He dropped the hammer. He did not look back at her. He did not offer a word of thanks, or payment, or apology. He simply walked away, his gait uneven from the wound. He did not go toward the road. He went toward the hills, disappearing into the rocky outcrops and scrub oak, vanishing as if he were just a part of the landscape. Marietta was left alone, with her bolted cabin, her pounding heart, and a fixed gate. She felt angry. She felt relieved. She felt, more than anything, profoundly empty. That night, the silence of the cabin was heavier than before. It was loud. She went to bolt the door. Her old ritual. She stopped. On the porch, placed neatly on the top step, was a rabbit. It was freshly killed, skinned, and cleaned. It was a gift. It was a payment. It was a thank you. He could not speak. Marietta stared at it for a long time. She looked out at the dark hills, but saw nothing. She picked up the rabbit. It was still warm. She closed the door, and, for the first time since Elias died, she bolted it not entirely out of fear. The rabbit was gone by morning. The porch step was empty. Marietta had half expected this, but the clean, empty wood still sent a small, strange jolt through her. She had not cooked the rabbit. She had left it there, on the step, as if accepting it were a bargain she was not ready to make. But in the night, he had returned and taken it, or the coyotes had. She preferred to think it was him. That night, she took a half loaf of stale bread and a small brick of salt pork and left it on the porch. In the morning, the food was gone. In its place were 3 quail eggs, nestled in a small, intricate cup of woven grass. A silent language began. She would leave a jar of water, or a handful of jerky. He would leave a perfect, neatly stretched jackrabbit pelt, or a cluster of edible roots she had not known how to find. Their trade was never spoken of. It happened in the hours between twilight and dawn, a ritual of ghosts. She began to feel his presence even when he was gone. She would see a rock formation and wonder if he was in it, watching. The plains no longer felt entirely empty. They felt occupied. One afternoon, she found a small carving on her windowsill. It was a piece of cottonwood, no bigger than her thumb, whittled into the shape of a lizard. The detail was painstaking. She picked it up, the wood still smelling fresh. She looked at it for a long time before closing her hand around it and slipping it into her apron pocket. She kept it there, her fingers often worrying its smooth, carved surface. Weeks passed. The angry winds of spring softened into the dry, heavy heat of early summer. The land grew thirsty. One evening, the sky turned a bruised, greenish purple. The air grew still, holding its breath. Then the rain came. It was not the gentle, soaking rain she prayed for. It was a violent, cold deluge, turning the dust yard into a thick, red soup. Marietta had been trying to reinforce the small dam Elias had built for the runoff. A hopeless task. She was a quarter-mile from the cabin when the sky broke. The first drops were as big as coins, and within a minute, she was soaked to the bone, her thin dress clinging to her like a shroud. She ran, slipping and sliding in the new mud, her hair plastered to her face. She was colder than she'd been in winter. She reached the porch, gasping, fumbling for the door latch, her hands numb. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the awning. She screamed, stumbling back, her hand flying to her throat. Tohanu stood there. He was perfectly dry. He had been waiting under the small overhang, watching her. In his arms, he held a bundle of dry firewood, mesquite and oak, split and ready for the hearth. He must have gathered it days ago, kept it stashed somewhere nearby. Knowing this rain was coming, he looked at her, dripping and shaking. He did not move. He just watched her, his black eyes unreadable. He stepped forward and set the wood down on the porch, neat and stacked. "You should get inside," he said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding, unused. She stared at the wood, then at him. The rain was a curtain around them, isolating them on the small porch. It was the first time they had spoken, truly, since he had told her his name. "Why are you here?" she whispered, the question torn from her, more accusation than inquiry. "Why do you keep staying?" He looked past her, out into the sheeting rain, toward the dark hills that were his home. His profile was sharp, like an axe head. "I have no tribe anymore," he said. The words were flat. An ending. He stepped off the porch, not seeming to notice the cold or the wet, and vanished into the gray deluge. Marietta stood there for a long time, shivering, staring at the perfectly stacked pile of dry wood. Their silent arrangement became a quiet routine. The fear she felt had changed. It was no longer the sharp panic of an intruder, but the dull, constant ache of a dangerous secret. She found herself mending. He had left a shirt by the well, the one she had cut open to tend his wound. It was stiff with old blood and dirt. She took it, scrubbed it in the basin until her knuckles were raw, and then stitched the ragged cut with her finest thread. She folded it and left it on the well cover. The next morning, it was gone. A few days later, she heard a sound on a roof. She froze, shotgun in hand, her heart in her throat. She crept outside and looked up. It was Tohanu. He was perched on the low slope, replacing the shingles that the dust storm had torn loose. He worked with an economy of motion, quick and silent. He had made new shingles from a fallen cedar. She did not call out. She just watched. He was rebuilding her life, piece by piece, while she was mending his. They lived in this strange, suspended truce. Two people circling a shared space of loneliness. They never spoke of it. They never touched. But the looking became a problem. She would be hanging her laundry, her arms raised, and feel his eyes on her. She would turn, and he would be gone. But the air where he had been still prickled. She brought him a dipper of water one afternoon when he was fixing a fence post. He had been working in the sun for hours. He turned, and he was closer than she had anticipated. His hand reached for the dipper. Her hand was still on it. Their fingers did not brush, but they were separated by an inch of air that felt more solid than wood. She looked at his face. She saw the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a thin, white line. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, and something else, a deep, settled sadness that she recognized, for it lived in her, too. He looked at her mouth. She let go of the dipper and stepped back, her neck flushing with heat. "It is hot," she said, her voice sounding stupid and thin. He just nodded, drank the water in one long pull, and turned back to the fence. The danger, she realized, was not just from the outside. The outside came soon enough. She did not go into Jericho Creek. She could not, but the town came to her. It was Jed Pike who saw him, or claimed to. Jed was a man who owned nothing but a horse and a bad reputation. He sometimes rode the fences for the bigger ranches, but mostly he drank and gossiped. He must have been riding the ridge, looking for stray cattle, when he saw the smoke from Tohanu's small, hidden fire. Or perhaps just Tohanu himself. Marietta was in the barn, brushing the mule. When she heard the horses, it was too many. It was at least 4, maybe 5, coming fast. She ran to the barn door. A group of armed men was riding up her small lane. She recognized them. Jed Pike was in the lead, his face self-important. Behind him were Mr. Henderson from the mercantile, the blacksmith, and 2 other ranchers she knew by sight. They all had rifles across their saddles. A posse. Tohanu was in the back of the barn, oiling a hinge. He had heard them. He stood up, and his entire body changed. The quiet, watchful man disappeared. In his place was a warrior. His eyes went flat and cold. He pulled the long knife from his belt. He was looking at the back window. An escape route. He was ready to run. "No," Marietta hissed, grabbing his arm. It was the first time she had ever touched him. His skin was hot. The muscle under her hand was like stone. He looked at her, startled. "They'll see you. They'll run you down." She dragged him, her grip frantic. "The cellar, in the floor, now." He hesitated. Running was his instinct. Fighting was his instinct. Hiding in a hole was not. "Now!" she begged. She pulled open the heavy trap door in the corner of the barn, the one that led to the small, damp root cellar. The air that came up smelled of dirt and old potatoes. He looked at her, then at the black square. He gave one sharp nod and disappeared down the ladder, pulling his knife with him. Marietta threw the door closed, kicked straw over it, and then threw an old, broken saddle on top of the straw. She ran to the front of the barn, wiping her sweaty hands on her apron, just as the men reined in, their horses kicking up dust. "Afternoon, Ms. Beth," Jed Pike said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. He had never called her by her married name before. "Quite a ways out here. You alone?" "I'm always alone. Mr. Pike," Marietta said. Her voice was shaking, but she held it steady. She could feel her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. "You know that. We ain't so sure." Jed sneered. "I was up on the ridge, saw an Apache, saw him coming onto your land." "You saw a trick of the light," Marietta said, clutching her apron. "There's no one here." "Mind if we look around?" "Mr. Henderson asked. He looked uncomfortable, but he held his rifle ready. "Just to be sure." "Marietta, for your own protection." "Protection?" she repeated, the word tasting like ash. "That's right," Jed said. He dismounted. "The one I saw looked like Tohanu, the one who's been killing folks up north. We hear he's in the area. Big bounty on him." Marietta's blood went cold. "Tohanu, a wanted man, a murderer." "I haven't seen anyone." She lied. The lie felt thick in her mouth. Jed pushed past her into the barn. "Look around. Boys." The men dismounted and spread out. They kicked over her hay bales. They peered into the empty mule stall. Jed Pike walked right over the root cellar door, his boots scattering the straw. Marietta thought she would faint. He stopped, looked down at the broken saddle, and scoffed. "This place is falling apart," he said. He walked to the back window, the one Tohanu had been looking at. He stared out at the hills. He's out here, I know it. There's nothing here. Jed. Mister, Henderson said, his voice impatient. We're wasting our time. She's lying, Jed muttered, staring at Marietta. She's got that crazy look in her eyes, just like they say. That's enough, Henderson said, his voice sharp. He tipped his hat to Marietta. Apologies, ma'am. We'll leave you be, but you lock your doors. You hear? I always do, she whispered. They mounted. Jed Pike was the last to leave. He gave her one last, long, suspicious look. You see anything, you send word, or we'll be back, and we won't be so polite. She watched them ride away, until they were just small specks of dust against the horizon. She stood there until her knees gave out. She slid down the barn wall, her whole body trembling in the aftermath. After a long time, she got up, she moved the saddle, she kicked back the straw. She lifted the heavy trap door. Tohanu emerged from the darkness. He did not look like a man who had been hiding. He looked like a man who had been waiting. His knife was still in his hand. She stared at him. The fear, the lie, the humiliation, and the adrenaline all crashing in on her at once. A murderer, she said, her voice a harsh rasp. They said you were a murderer. He said nothing. He just looked at her, his face a mask of stone. You let them in, she said, her voice rising, the panic breaking through. You brought this here. They're going to come back. They're going to come back and... She couldn't finish. She was thinking of the fire, of the screams. You're going to get me killed, she shrieked, the words finally exploding out of her. Just like them. You're going to get me killed. She was hitting him. She didn't even realize it. Her fists were beating against his chest, which was as hard as oak. The blows were useless, frantic, like a trapped bird. He did not stop her. He did not move. He just stood there and let her spend her terror on him. Finally, she collapsed against him, her strength gone, sobbing. Get out, she whispered, her face buried in his dirty shirt. Please, just get out. He said nothing. He did not put his arms around her. He did not push her away. He just stood, rigid, until she pulled back, ashamed. She wiped her face, her hands streaked with dirt and tears. She looked at him, and he was a stranger again, a dangerous, wanted man. Go, she said. He watched her for one long, silent moment. Then he turned and walked out of the barn. He did not go to the hills. He walked down the lane, the same way the posse had gone. He did not look back. The next 3 days were a new kind of hell. The silence was absolute. He was gone. He had listened to her. He had left. The emptiness of the farm was suffocating. Before, it had been a lonely place. Now, it was a hollow one. She had not realized how much space he had taken up, just by existing on the edges of her life. Now his absence was a physical presence, a void. She would see the mended fence, the repaired roof, the carving of the lizard on her shelf. Each one was a small, sharp pain. She had been right to send him away. He was danger. He was death. He was also the first person who had not looked at her like she was broken. On the third night, the dream came back. It was Elias. She dreamed of him often. But this was different. It was not the fire, not the blood. It was just Elias, standing in the cabin. But he was not the gentle, hopeful man she had married. He was the man from the last few months, the man who drank, the man whose faith had soured, the man who had started to look at her with resentment. He was scowling, his face dark. You let him in, the dreamy Elias said, his voice cold. You let him in my house. He fixed the gate. She whispered in the dream. You let him touch what was mine. She woke up in a cold sweat, her own words choking her. It's not your house. She whispered into the darkness. It's my prison. The guilt was a physical thing, sitting on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Guilt for Elias. Guilt for Tohanu. She found herself on the floor, by the cold hearth, crying. It was not the wild sobbing of the barn. It was a deep, quiet, hopeless weeping for everything. For Samuel. For Elias. For the woman she used to be. For the man she had just sent away. She cried until her eyes were raw. She was a ruin, and she knew it. A floorboard creaked. She looked up, her heart stopping. Tohanu was standing in the open doorway. The moon was at his back, turning him into a black silhouette. He had come back. He stood there, unmoving, watching her break. Slowly, she pulled herself together, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She was too tired to be scared, too tired to be angry. She was just empty. He stepped inside. He was holding something. It was her book, a small, worn volume of poetry that had been her mother's. She had taken it to the graves. She must have left it there, the small, twin graves on the hill. She had not been back in months. He must have known. He must have seen her go there. He had gone to the one place that was sacred to her, the one place that was hers and Elias's and Samuel's. He held it out to her. She looked at the book, then at his hand. His fingers were long, stained, and scarred. He had gone to her past, and he had returned it to her. He was not trying to replace it. He was acknowledging it. She took the book. Her fingers brushed his. It was like a lightning strike, a shock that ran up her arm and straight to her heart. It was just skin on skin, but it was the first real, human touch she had felt in over a year. He did not pull away. She did not pull away. Their fingers stayed there, just touching. For a long, impossible second, they sat by the firelight. She had built a small fire. The air was charged, humming. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall. She sat on her stool. The book was in her lap. "They are right," he said, his voice quiet, directed at the fire. "I have killed men." She looked at him. "Why?" "For survival, and for justice." "Was it justice, what you did up north?" He turned to look at her. His eyes were not cold. They were just old. "The soldiers killed my sister, after she went to them for help. Was that justice?" Marietta had no answer. There was no answer. They sat in silence. The tension was a living thing. It was a rope, pulled taut between them. She could feel the heat of him, even from 6 feet away. Her hand, resting on the stool, was near his. He was so still. She did not know why she did it. She was not thinking. She was only feeling. She reached out her hand, palm down, and laid it on the floor. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand. He froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. She did not move. The silence stretched. The fire popped. She looked at his face. He was looking at their hands. She leaned forward. She was not moving to her stool. She was moving toward him. She knelt on the floor in front of him. He watched her, his eyes wide, like a wolf in a trap, unsure if the trap was real. She leaned closer. He flinched. He pulled back, just an inch, his whole body tensing. "You shouldn't want this," he murmured. His voice was thick. It was a warning. It was a plea. She stopped, inches from his face. She could smell the dust on him, the faint scent of cedar. She looked at his mouth. "It's already too late," she replied. She closed the small distance and pressed her lips to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of two people at the end of their rope. His lips were dry, chapped. He tasted like dust and grief. He did not kiss her back. He did not move. He was stone. She put her hand on his cheek, and she kissed him again. A soft, slow pressure. A confession. "I am also broken. I am also here." He did not stop her. And then, slowly, like a man waking from a long sleep, his hand came up and covered hers, the one on his cheek. He did not push it away. He held it there, and he let her in. Marietta woke to the cold. The fire was a pile of gray-white ash, and the faint, pearly light of dawn was pressing against the boarded-up windows. She was alone. She was on the floor, tangled in the one good blanket, the one she had taken from her bed. The spot beside her was empty, but the floorboard still held the faintest warmth, or perhaps she just imagined it. The cabin smelled of cold smoke, old dust, and something else, a scent of cedar and sweat, a male scent that was not Elias. He was gone, vanished before sunrise. She pulled the blanket tighter, and the reality of the night before, of the kiss, of the slow, desperate hours by the firelight, crashed down on her. A wave of shame, so potent it made her nauseous, rose from her stomach. She scrambled to her feet, the blanket falling away. What had she done? She was a widow, a grieving widow. The town whispered, a deranged widow. They accused, and she had, with him, an Apache, a wanted man, a killer. She had kissed him. She had invited him. She had let her loneliness, her starved and broken body, betray every vow she had ever made. She had betrayed Elias. She had shamed the memory of her son. "Lord," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. But it was not a prayer. It was a curse. She moved with a frantic, sudden energy. She was a woman possessed by a need for erasure. She grabbed the blanket from the floor, her fingers clutching it as if it were a snake. She threw open the cabin door. The morning air was sharp and clean. It felt like an accusation. She dragged the blanket to the washtub, pumped water from the well with violent, jerking motions, and threw the blanket in. She grabbed the bar of lye soap. She would scrub the memory of his touch from the wool, even if it took her skin with it. She went back inside. The floor, the hearth, the place where he had sat, where she had knelt. It looked the same, just pine boards worn smooth by time, but to her, it was a stain. She got the scrubbing brush, the bucket, the soap. She knelt, just as she had knelt last night, but this time for penance. She scrubbed the floorboards until her knuckles were raw and bleeding, the water in the bucket turning a filthy gray. She was trying to scrub away the scent, the sight, the sin. She saw the small pile of firewood he had left by the door, the same wood that had fueled the fire of their encounter. Her eyes narrowed. She gathered the wood. She took the small, worn pallet he had slept on during his recovery, the one she had been too sentimental to throw out. She built a small pyre in the yard, far from the cabin. She lit it. She watched the blankets, the pallet, and the wood burn. The smoke rose, thin and white, into the pristine blue of the morning sky. She was cleansing her home. She was burning the evidence. She was trying, desperately, to burn the shame. She was confused, because beneath the shame, buried deep, was a spark, a terrifying, tiny ember. She had not felt alive, truly alive, since Samuel died, last night, in the arms of a man she should have feared. She had felt a flicker of it. That, more than the act itself, was the deepest betrayal. She avoided him. He returned, as she knew he would. She saw him at dusk, a shadow at the edge of her property, near the fence line. He was holding something, a rabbit, likely their old, silent language. Marietta, who had been scattering feed for the chickens, froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel him looking at her. She turned her back, a deliberate, sharp movement. She walked stiffly to the cabin, went inside, and threw the heavy bar across the door. She did not look back. She watched him through a crack in the window boards. He stood there for a long time, unmoving. He had seen the locked door. He understood. After 10, perhaps 15 minutes, he set the rabbit on the ground and walked away, disappearing into the growing shadows. The cabin felt small, hot, and suffocating. The next day was the same. She worked the small garden patch, her back rigid, every nerve ending aware of the hills around her. She refused to look. She left no food on the porch. The rabbit he had left was gone, taken by coyotes. Good, she thought. That evening, he was there again. This time, he was closer. He was at the well, as if waiting. She saw him and turned to go back inside. Marietta. His voice stopped her. It was not loud, but it cut through the evening air. She stopped, her back to him. She would not turn. She would not. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. "You should have stayed gone," she said, her voice tight, trembling. What happened? It was a mistake, a moment of sickness. She heard him move. the soft sound of his boot on the dry earth. He was behind her. She could feel his presence, the heat of him. "It was not a mistake," he said, his voice low. "Go away," she whispered. "Leave me be. I cannot. You are danger. You are death. You bring them here. Leave me alone." She finally turned, her hands clenched into fists, ready to scream, to throw something. He was standing 10 feet away, his face a mask of stone in the twilight. But his eyes were not stone. They were filled with a profound, quiet sorrow. "You think I am the monster," he said. "They have a bounty on you." She threw at him, her voice cracking. "They say you are a murderer." "I am," he said. The simple, unadorned admission silenced her. He looked away, toward the purple line of the mountains. "I told you, I have killed for justice." He was silent for a long moment, and she knew he was deciding whether to give her this piece of himself. "I had a sister," he began, his voice rough. "She was younger than me. She liked to listen. She heard the white preacher in the town, the one from the mission. He told her about a new God, a better way. He told her she was a savage, but she could be saved. She believed him." He knelt, picking up a small stone, turning it over and over in his long fingers. "Our people were starving. The soldiers had burned our winter stores. My sister, she believed the missionaries. She said they were men of God. She said they would help. She ran to them. She took 2 of the younger children with her to show them, to beg for food." His fingers stilled on the stone. "Soldiers came to the mission. They were looking for warriors. They were drunk. They found my sister." He looked at Marietta, and his eyes were black, bottomless holes. "The men of God, they barred the door. They prayed, while the soldiers, they killed her after, and the children, they said she invited it." "Mari," Etta's hand flew to her mouth, a horrified, stifled sound. "I found them," Tohanu said, his voice flat, all emotion burned out of it. "I found her. She was not my sister anymore. I found the soldiers. They were in their camp. They were laughing." He tossed the stone. It landed in the dust with a soft thud. "That was my justice," he said. "I killed them all. I did not feel saved. I just was." He had given her his deepest, most poisoned wound. He had trusted her with the why. Marietta slid down the rough wood of the well, her legs giving out. She was weeping. Not for her, not for Elias. She was weeping for him, for his sister, for a world so brutal it could create such stories. His truth unlocked her own. "I am no better," she choked out, her face in her hands. I am worse." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Elias," she whispered, the name tearing from her. "My husband, he was not the man they remember in town. He was not the man I married, not at the end." She had to say it. She had to match his truth. "The farm was failing. Samuel was sick so often. The drink, it took him. He became angry. He became violent." She pulled up the sleeve of her left arm. Even in the dim light, the mottled, puckered skin of the old burn was visible, the scar that wrapped around her forearm. This was not the stove," she whispered, a confession she had never made, not even to herself. "This was him. He said I was not a good wife." She was sobbing now, the words torn from her. "That night, the night they came, I heard them. I heard the horses. I heard the men shouting, drunk. Elias, he had been mean. He had hit me." She looked up at Tohanu, her eyes streaming, begging him to understand, to condemn her. "I left the door, unlocked. I left it unbolted, on purpose." The secret was out, a poison drawn from a wound. I thought they would just take the food, take his whiskey. I thought they would scare him. I thought, oh, God, I don't know what I thought. I did not think," she gasped. "I did not think they would. Samuel, I did not—" She broke down, her whole body shaking with the force of a guilt that had been her only companion for a year. "I let them in. It was me. I am the one. Sister Albright was right. I killed them. I killed my own family." She fell forward, her hands in the dust. "Maybe I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered to the earth. "Maybe I don't deserve to live." She waited for him to leave, to walk away from her, the monster. Instead, she felt his presence shift. He knelt in front of her. He did not touch her. He just knelt, bringing himself down to her level. He was silent for a long time. She could hear his breathing, steady, slow. "Then we are alike," he said. The words were soft. They were not forgiveness. They were not absolution. They were recognition. He was not judging her. He was joining her, here in the dirt, in the ruin of their pasts. She looked up. His face, inches from hers, was not filled with disgust. It was filled with a terrible, aching understanding. That night, the cabin was different. The shame was gone, burned away by the raw, flaying honesty of their confessions. All that was left was the truth. They were two broken, damaged people, stained by violence, and utterly alone. They ate a silent meal of jerky and cold bread. He did not move to the door. She did not move to her bed. He sat by the hearth. She sat on her stool. Finally, she stood, but not to go to her room. She took her one good blanket from her bed, the one she had scrubbed clean, and brought it to the fire. She laid it on the floor, on the very board she had scrubbed. She lay down, her back to him, an offering, an acceptance. She heard him move. He lay down on the floor behind her. They did not touch. They lay like two spoons, a foot of air between them, listening to the crickets, listening to the beating of their own hearts. After a long time, she felt his hand, hesitant, touch her hair. She turned to face him. This time, it was not the desperate, frantic collision of two starved people. It was slow. It was uncertain. It was a question. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, a kiss of shared sorrow. He pulled back the sleeve of her nightgown, the one she had not bothered to change, and he looked at the scar on her arm. He bent his head, and she felt his lips, warm and soft, press against the dead, puckered skin. He kissed the scar. She shuddered, a sob catching in her throat. She reached out, her hand trembling. She found the hem of his shirt. She touched the hard, ropey scar on his side, the place her hands had healed. She traced the old bullet wound, her finger learning the map of his pain. He kissed her again, his hand cupping her face. And this time, it was not about forgiveness. It was about survival. The next morning, they were awake, lying quiet. When the sound of a horse came, it was not a posse. It was a single rider, a thin man in a dusty town suit, carrying a leather satchel. He reined in 20 yards from the cabin, his eyes wide with fear, as if he expected an arrow. Tohanu had vanished, melting into the shadows of the small barn, before the man had even dismounted. "Marietta Beth," the man called out, his voice high and nervous. Marietta stepped onto the porch, pulling her shawl tight. "I am Mrs. Beth." "A letter," the man said. He did not want to come closer. He pulled a long envelope from his satchel. "From the Territorial Office, by vote of the Jericho Creek Township Committee." He spurred his horse forward, dropped the letter on the ground at the base of the steps, and wheeled the horse around. "You have been served notice," he yelled over his shoulder, and kicked the horse into a gallop. Not looking back, Marietta stared at the letter, lying in the dust. It looked official, dangerous. She picked it up. The seal was wax. She broke it. Tohanu emerged from the barn, silent, and stood at her side. She read the words. They were dense, legal. "Pursuant to, in accordance, failure to maintain viable homestead, moral vagrancy." She read the lines 3 times before they made sense. "They're taking the farm," she whispered. "The town. They voted. They've seized my land." The paper trembled in her hand. It was a legal pretext, a way to be rid of her. The cursed widow, the woman who let darkness in. Tohanu took the paper. He could not read the words, but he read her face. "What is it?" "They are throwing me out. My land, my home." His reaction was immediate. "We leave," he said. "Now. Together." Marietta looked at him. She looked at the barren yard. She looked at the letter in her hand. A laugh escaped her. It was a terrible sound, dry and brittle, like dead leaves skittering over rock. "Leave?" she cackled, the sound high and bordering on hysteria. "Leave and go where? Tohanu?" "The canyons. North," he said, his voice urgent. "I know places, hidden, safe." Her laughter choked off. "Safe? A white widow and a hunted Apache? We would last a day, maybe two, if we were lucky." She looked at him, her eyes bright with a bitter, terrible clarity. "Don't you understand? There is no together, not out there. They would hunt us for sport. You, for the bounty. Me, for being with you. There is no place for us in this world." He did not understand this. He understood fighting. "Then I will fight for this," he said, his voice a low growl. He put his hand on the cabin wall. "I will fight for you." "Fight who?" she cried. That little man on the horse, Jed Pike, Sister Albright, the whole town? You'll kill them all?" "Yes," he said, and he meant it. Marietta's face went white. The vision of it. More blood. More. "No!" She grabbed his arm. "No!" she said, her voice fierce, shaking. "I will not have more blood on my soil. This land has drunk enough. My husband, my son, it is enough." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "If you kill for me, I lose you too. I lose this." She beat her own chest. "I lose me. You become the monster they say you are, and I become the woman who asked you to be. I will not. I will not." He stared at her, his jaw tight. He was a man of action, and she had just tied his hands. He was a warrior, and she had told him not to fight. He said nothing. He yanked his arm from her grasp and turned away. That night, the fragile, tender connection was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard wall. He slept by the hearth. She slept in her bed. They lay with their backs to each other, separated by 10 feet of floorboards and a chasm that was 1,000 miles wide. The silence in the cabin was a physical thing. It was heavier than the roof. It was louder than the wind. It was the sound of two people, bound by their ghosts. With no future and a past they could not escape. It was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The saloon in Jericho Creek was not built for meetings. It was built for drinking and despair, which made it the perfect setting. The room was thick with the smell of stale beer, sweat, and cheap tobacco. It was filled with men, ranchers, miners, the blacksmith, and Mr. Henderson, all gathered for the town meeting. Marietta stood in the doorway. She had walked the 3 miles from her farm, the legal notice clutched in her hand. She had washed her face and put on her one good dress, the gray wool she had been married in. She was alone. She had told Tohanu to stay. This was her fight, to be fought her way. His presence would only be a match to tinder. He had not argued. He had just watched her go, his face dark, and then he had melted into the hills. She stepped inside. The buzz of male conversation stopped. Every eye turned to her. It was the collective weight of their judgment. A physical blow. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice clear, though her insides were liquid with fear. "I am here about the notice." Mr. Henderson, polishing a glass behind the bar, refused to meet her eye. "This is a town committee matter. Marietta, not for... I am the landowner." She cut him off. "It is my matter." A man in the corner, a miner named Silas, spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from her boot. "Landowner," he sneered. "You're a curse, a crazy woman living in filth. You got no right to property." She's harboring, Jed Pike yelled, his face red with drink. I saw that Apache. She's harboring a killer. I am harboring no one. She lied, her voice ringing with a conviction she did not feel. I am a widow, alone, and you are trying to steal my husband's land. She held up the paper. This is illegal. Moral vagrancy. Failure to maintain? My farm is holding. I am holding. You're holding something. All right, Silas grunted, and a few men laughed. A low, ugly sound. She looked from face to face. Mr. Henderson, who had once given Samuel a piece of candy. The blacksmith, who had repaired her wagon wheel. They were all strangers. This is not right, she said, her voice shaking now, the tremor betraying her. You cannot just vote to steal a woman's home. It's done, Ms. Beth, a new voice said. Sheriff Brody. He was a thick, heavy man, his belly hanging over his gun belt. His face was perpetually flushed with whiskey. He was the ringleader, she knew. The man who enforced the town's will. The committee voted, it's legal, you got 10 days to vacate. Or what? She challenged. He smiled, a slow, yellow-toothed expression. Or I'll drag you out myself. Now get out of here. You're spoiling the air. She stood her ground, her chin high. She would not let them see her break. She looked at each man, one by one, burning their faces into her memory. The silence stretched. Silas, emboldened by the sheriff, walked past her. As he did, he turned his head and spat. It hit her dress, a dark, wet star of tobacco juice on the gray wool. Marietta did not flinch. She did not look down. She just held her head higher, her eyes locked on Sheriff Brody. She felt the spit start to slide, cold, down the fabric. Inside, she was trembling so violently she thought her knees would buckle, but on the outside, she was ice. She turned, slowly, and walked out of the saloon, her back straight. She did not run. She walked the whole way, through the dusty main street and onto the path home, the stain on her dress drying in the hot sun. She did not know that Tohanu had never left. He had watched her walk into the saloon. He had watched her stand in that nest of vipers. He had waited, hidden on the roof of the mercantile, his body coiled, his knife in his hand. He had heard the shouts. He had seen Silas spit. He had almost moved. His muscles had bunched, ready to drop from the roof and slit the man's throat where he stood. But he had seen her. He saw her raise her chin. He saw her walk out, unbroken. Her pride was a thing he had not understood before, a different kind of strength. It was not his, but he respected it. He did not follow her home. He had other work. He followed Sheriff Brody. He shadowed him for the rest of the day. He watched him drink at the saloon. He watched him stumble out, long after midnight. Brody was a creature of habit, a mean, predictable drunk. He lived in a small, filthy shack behind the jailhouse. Tohanu waited until the lights were out, until the sounds of snoring began. He moved without a sound, slipping the lock on the back door with his knife, a skill learned from a lifetime of survival. He was inside. The shack stank of unwashed bedding, stale whiskey, and fried pork. Tohanu moved through the single room to the bed. Sheriff Brody was a mountain of flesh, dead to the world, his gun belt hanging on the bedpost. Tohanu stood over him. It would be so easy. A single, silent thrust. The man who had threatened her, the man who had smiled as she was humiliated, the leader of the pack that wanted to tear her down. It was justice, the kind he understood. His sister's face flashed in his mind, the faces of the laughing soldiers. He raised the knife, the faint moonlight from the dirty window catching the steel. He thought of Marietta. He thought of her face when she had pleaded with him. If you kill for me, I lose you too. I lose me. He saw her, not as the weeping, broken woman in the dust, but as the woman in the saloon, her head held high, fighting in her own way. If he did this, he would be the monster she feared. He would be the beast they all claimed he was. He would be proving Jed Pike right. He would be proving that her faith in him, her trust in him, was a mistake. His hand trembled. The desire to kill was a physical, burning thing. It was a hunger. He pulled back. He lowered the knife. He looked at the sleeping man, his face slack and ugly. He felt a different kind of power. Not the power to take a life, but the power to spare it. He did not leave empty-handed. He moved to the bedpost and took the gun belt. He took the rifle leaning against the wall. Then he went to the small lockbox he had seen the sheriff kick under the bed. He forced it open. It was full of papers. He took them. He left as silently as he had come. When Marietta returned to the cabin, she had scrubbed the stain from her dress until the wool was raw, but she could not scrub the tremor from her hands. She was sitting at the table, staring at the wall, when Tohanu returned, just before dawn. He dropped the sheriff's gun belt, the rifle, and the stack of papers on the table. She stared at the items. What? What did you do? He is alive, Tohanu said. He sat across from her. He looked exhausted. I did not. He looked at her, his eyes clear and steady. I won't be the monster they say I am, not for them, and not for you. Marietta looked at the gun, then at the man. He had chosen. He had listened. He had chosen her way, the harder way. A new strength, not born of despair, but of a cold, clear anger rose in her. His restraint had inspired her. They want to fight with the laws, she said, her voice no longer trembling. Then we will fight with the laws. She got up and went to the old, battered trunk at the foot of her bed. It was Elias's trunk. She had not opened it since he died. The hinges creaked. It smelled of dust and old wool. She dug. She found her old marriage deed. She found the original territorial land grant, signed and sealed, with Elias's name. She found tax receipts. The man who delivered the notice, she said. He was from the regional court, not from Jericho Creek. They had to file this with someone higher. She looked at Tohanu, a wild, thin hope in her eyes. They are just a town committee. Maybe they don't have the final say. She looked at the papers. I'm going to the court. I'm going to show them this. They will not let you ride alone. Tohanu said, They will kill you if they see you with me. Then they will not see me, he said. They left an hour later. Marietta rode the mule. Tohanu walked beside her. He was no longer a warrior. He was dressed in Elias's old farm clothes he had mended. They were too short in the arms and too tight in the shoulders, but they made him look different, smaller, a laborer. He wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, pulled low, shadowing his face. He walked with a slight shuffle, the gait of a hired hand, not the proud, silent tread of an Apache. The disguise was thin, but it might be enough. They traveled all day, pushing hard, avoiding the main road, taking the high, rocky trails that Tohanu knew. They spoke little. The tension of the journey was a third presence, riding with them. As evening fell, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The air became heavy and electric. A jagged fork of lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the rocks. The storm broke with the same violence as the one that had first brought Tohanu to her. Rain came in solid, horizontal sheets. We cannot stay out in this, Tohanu yelled over the wind. He pointed. There, a lodge. For the stage line. It was a small, sod-roofed building, a simple way station in the middle of nowhere. A single, yellow lamp glowed in the window. Marietta nodded, her clothes already soaked, her hair plastered to her skull. Tohanu pulled the mule into the lean-to stable, his movements quick, while Marietta ran to the door and knocked. A haggard woman with suspicious eyes opened it. We ain't got much, she said. Just a room, Marietta said, pushing wet hair from her face. For me and my hand. We're on our way to the court. My brother died. We're settling the estate. The lie came surprisingly easy. The woman looked past her, at Tohanu, who was hunched over, tending the mule. One room, the woman said, her eyes lingering on his dark skin. One bed, that'll be 2 bits. Marietta paid. The room was hardly a room at all. It was a closet with a leaky ceiling and a single, narrow cornhusk mattress. The storm raged outside. The thunder a constant, rolling barrage. There was nowhere to hide. Marietta dried her hair with a rough, thin towel. Tohanu stood by the window, staring out at the white rain, his back to her. The silence in the tiny room was more intimate than a touch. I can take the floor, she said. No, he said, not turning. I will. You are disguised as my servant, not my keeper, she said, trying for a lightness she did not feel. He turned. I am neither. The storm lit the room in a flash of white, stark light, capturing his face. He looked lost. We don't have to, she began, and did not know how to finish. What life could we have? Marietta? He asked, his voice quiet, almost lost in the sound of the rain. This hiding me in your husband's clothes? You lying to strangers? It's just for now, she said. Is it? He looked at her. What happens after the court? If you win, if you lose, we go back. They come for you. I kill them. We run. We run until they catch us. Or we run until we are old and tired. There is no home. The word hung in the air. A painful, impossible thing. I'm afraid, she whispered, her first full confession of it. Not of them, not really. I'm afraid of this, of wanting something I cannot have. What do you want? He asked. I want a day, just one day, where I am not the widow, not the survivor. I want to wake up and not be ashamed. She looked at her hands. I want what Elias and I had before, at the beginning. I want a child. I want... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. The children they would never have. A brown-skinned baby in a white world. A half-breed child hunted by both sides. It was a death sentence. She began to cry. Silent, hopeless tears. He moved, crossing the small room in 2 strides. He did not touch her. He just stood in front of her. I see children, he said, his voice a low rasp. My sister's children, the ones who died. I think maybe I died with them. Maybe I am just a ghost, and this is a dream. You are not a ghost, she said, her voice fierce. She reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, slow beat under her palm. You are here. He looked down at her hand, then he covered it with his own. He led her to the small, narrow bed. Their intimacy that night was not like before. It was not desperation or confession. It was tender. It was aching. It was the full, painful, joyous acknowledgement of 2 living, breathing people, choosing to be together in a world that forbade it. He was slow and gentle, and he kissed her as if he were memorizing her. When it was over, she clung to him. She did not let go. She held him like a drowning woman, her face buried in his neck. The storm outside and the storm inside her had finally, for a moment, found a point of peace. She felt him kiss her hair. You saved me, he whispered in her ear. She did not understand. I did nothing. I was a ghost, he said, his arms tightening around her. You made me. Here, you made me stay. They won. Not a victory, but a breath of air. The judge at the regional court was an old, tired man with a face like worn leather. He listened to Marietta's story. He looked at her marriage deed. He looked at the land grant. He looked at the notice from Jericho Creek. He sighed. Mrs. Beth, he said, the township committee. They have overstepped, but they are not without influence. I cannot dismiss their claim outright. Marietta's heart sank. But, he continued, I am granting you a temporary stay, a delay of 60 days. They cannot seize your land. They cannot evict you. Not for 60 days. I will review the matter. In the meantime, you go home and be careful. It was a reprieve. It was a gasp of air before the water closed over her head again. It was not a solution, but it was time. They rode back in the sunlight. The world looked sharp and bright and dangerous. When they reached the homestead, the cabin looked small, but it looked safe. It was theirs. For 2 more months. Tohanu stood in the center of the main room. The sun was streaming through the one unboarded window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He looked at her. She looked at him. They had been hiding in darkness, in shadows, in storms. She walked to him. He met her halfway. She unbuttoned her dress, the gray wool. He did not move. He watched her. She stepped out of it. She stood before him in her thin cotton shift, in the bright, unforgiving light of day. He touched her face. He traced the line of her jaw, and they made love in the daylight. For the first time. There were no shadows to hide their scars. There was no night to muffle their breathing. It was an act of pure, defiant, daylight truth. Afterward, they lay on her bed, tangled in the sheets, the sunlight warm on their skin. She felt light. The shame was gone. A few hours later, while Tohanu was outside, checking the perimeter, Marietta stripped the bed. She took the sheets to the washtub, scrubbing them with an obsessive, focused energy. She was smiling. When he returned, he leaned against the doorframe, watching her. His arms were crossed. He had a smile on his face. It was not a grimace, not a tightening of the lips. It was a real, actual smile. It transformed his face. "What?" she asked, her hands still in the water, her cheeks flushing. "I saw you," he said, his voice laced with a humor she had never heard. "After the fire, you scrubbed the floor. You burned the wood. And now, the sheets." He stepped onto the porch. "I saw you cleaning the evidence of last night," he teased, his rare smile widening. "And you blushed so red I thought the sun had risen in your face." She gasped, then laughed. It was a real laugh, a sound she had not made in over a year. It bubbled up from her chest, surprising her. She grabbed the wet rag from the tub and threw it at him. He dodged it, laughing with her. She leaned against the washtub, her laughter fading, her smile trembling. The sudden joy was too much. It highlighted the darkness that was waiting. Her laughter faded to tears. She looked at him, her eyes wide, desperate, the reprieve of the day already gone. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "Tohanu, please, don't leave me." The smile left his face. He looked at her, his eyes filled with the truth of their situation. He could promise her nothing. He could not promise her tomorrow. He could not promise her safety. He didn't answer, but he walked to her. He took her wet, chapped hands in his, and he stayed. The peace lasted 5 days, 5 days of shared daylight, of mended fences, of quiet meals eaten at the same table. The 60-day reprieve granted by the court felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. They worked side by side. Tohanu, repairing the foundation of the burned shed while Marietta salvaged what she could. Their movements economical, their words few. They spoke of the hidden canyon, not as a dream, but as a plan, a when, not an if. The sharp, brittle joy of that one afternoon had settled into a quiet, determined purpose. The shame was gone, burned out of them, but the fear remained, a low, constant hum beneath the surface. The end of their fragile world came not with a posse, but with a child. Tohanu was on the ridge, a half-mile from the cabin, checking the snares he had set for rabbits. He was in his own buckskin trousers and loose cotton shirt. He was not hiding. He was simply existing on the land, a right he had not felt in a very long time. A boy, no older than 10, came scrambling up the rocks, searching for a stray calf. His name was Thomas Miller, the son of a settler whose small, struggling farm was 5 miles to the east. The boy stopped, frozen. He did not see a laborer. He did not see a man. He saw the high cheekbones, the long black hair, the knife on his hip. He saw the Apache of his parents' nightmares. The boy did not scream. His face went white. He dropped the length of rope he was carrying and ran, stumbling and sliding down the rocky slope, never looking back. Tohanu watched him go. He knew, with a cold, final certainty, what it meant. He returned to the cabin. Marietta was kneading bread, her hands covered in flour. She looked up, smiling. A smudge of white on her nose. The smile died when she saw his face. "A boy," he said. He did not need to say more. Marietta dropped the dough. Her hands began to tremble. "When?" "He will be home by afternoon. The father will be in Jericho Creek by nightfall." "They will come tomorrow," she whispered, her voice hollow. They came sooner. The news hit Jericho Creek like a lit match on dry prairie grass. Jed Pike's wild accusations, which had been simmering as rumor, were now confirmed. The crazy widow was not just crazy. She was consorting with the enemy. The murderer Tohanu was living in her house. By the next morning, the gossip had solidified into something far more dangerous. A new man rode into town. He was not a local. He was tall, thin, and wore 2 pistols, tied low and snug against his thighs. He had a face like a dried riverbed, all cracks and sun-scorched leather. He was a bounty hunter, a professional, drawn south by the whispers of Tohanu's presence. He carried a wrinkled, official writ that promised $500 for Tohanu, dead or alive. The town's vague, simmering malice now had a leader. The lawless mob now had the color of law. The bounty hunter did not come with a crowd. He rode up the lane alone, in the full, hot light of midday. He stopped his horse 100 yards from the cabin, a patient, assessing predator. Marietta watched from the window. Tohanu stood in the shadow of the doorway, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. The man on the horse just sat, his eyes scanning everything. He looked at the repaired gate. He looked at the chickens pecking in the dust. He looked at the thin wisp of smoke from the chimney. He looked at the house for a long, quiet minute. Then, satisfied, he turned his horse and rode slowly back to town. He had seen enough. He was going to gather his support. "He will bring them all," Tohanu said, his voice flat. "At dawn. It is their way." "Then you must go," Marietta said, her voice rising in sudden, frantic panic. She turned from the window and grabbed the front of his shirt. "Now, while it is light, go to the canyon. He is not after me. Not really. He is after you. That bounty, $500. They will kill you for that, Tohanu." "I know," he said, his voice calm. "Tohanu." "Listen to me," she begged, shaking him, the flour from her hands dusting his dark shirt. "You must run. I will tell them you were never here. I will tell them you forced me. I will say anything. I don't care. Just go. Live." He took her wrists, stilling her frantic hands. He looked down at her, his face calm, the decision already forged and cooled. "I told you, I will not be the monster, but I will not be the coward either." "This is not cowardice," she cried. "This is survival. You taught me that." "No," he said, his voice final. "Running is what I have always done. I ran from the soldiers. I ran from my people. After, I ran from the bounty hunters in the north. I ran from everything. I ran here." He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I will not run anymore. This is your land. We will stand on it." "They will kill you," she wept, her voice breaking. "Then they will," he said simply. "But I will not leave you to face them alone. And I will not die in a ditch, hunted like an animal. I will die here, on my feet, by your side." She looked at his face, at the absolute, unshakable resolve. He was not the ghost he once thought he was. He was a man of rock and iron. Her fear did not vanish. It just settled. It found a new anchor in his strength. "Then," she said, her voice shaking as she wiped her tears on her sleeve, "then we will need more ammunition." Dawn came not as a light, but as a sound. The low, growing thunder of many horses, moving fast. Marietta was already dressed. She had not slept. She had spent the night cleaning Elias's old shotgun. She checked the load. She had her father's old cavalry pistol, heavy and cold, tucked into the waistband of her skirt. Tohanu stood by the window, a silhouette against the pale, gray light. He had the rifle he had taken from Sheriff Brody. His knife was sharp, He had 2 pistols that Marietta had not known he possessed, laid out on the table. "They are many," he said. "I know." She walked to the door. She pulled back the heavy wooden bar. She stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, damp with the morning dew. She sat in the old rocking chair Elias had made and laid the shotgun across her lap. She would not hide in her own home. Tohanu did not follow. He stayed inside, a shadow in the doorway just behind her, his rifle ready. They came up the lane. It was not a posse, it was a mob. At least 15, maybe 20 men. Jed Pike, his face blotchy with drink and excitement. Silas, the miner who had spat at her. Mr. Henderson, his face pale, clearly wishing he were elsewhere, and leading them. The bounty hunter on his tall horse, his face impassive, and Sheriff Brody, his own face a mottled purple of rage and humiliation. They fanned out, forming a grim, silent half-circle in her yard, just beyond the newly mended gate. "Marietta Beth," Brody shouted, his voice thick, "you are in violation of the law. You are harboring a fugitive." "I am sitting on my porch, Sheriff." Marietta called back. Her voice was surprisingly clear. It carried easily in the cold, still air. "On land, the court gave me 60 days to keep." "That writ is void," the bounty hunter cut in. His voice was like dry gravel. "You aided and abetted a known murderer. That voids any claim you got. Send him out. Tohanu, we know you are in there. Send him out, and the woman lives." As if summoned, Tohanu stepped out of the shadow. He moved to stand beside Marietta's chair, the rifle held loosely in one hand. He did not aim it. He just stood there, tall and unmoving, an open defiance. A collective gasp went through the crowd. He was real. "There he is," Jed Pike screamed, his voice cracking with bloodlust. "Kill him." "This is not a lynching. Jed," Brody barked, though his own hand was on the grip of his pistol. "This is an arrest. Tohanu, you are wanted for murder in the Northern Territory. You will come now, or we will take you by force." "No," Tohanu said. The single word was quiet, but it was absolute. The bounty hunter smiled, a thin, cruel lifting of his lips. "That's all I needed." He began to raise his rifle, settling it in the crook of his arm. "Wait!" a voice cried out. A figure pushed through the line of mounted men. It was a woman, Sister Albright, the preacher's wife. She was on foot, her black dress dusty, her face pale, her eyes burning with a righteous, terrifying fire. This is the sin," she proclaimed, her voice a high-pitched shriek, her trembling finger pointing not at Tohanu, but at Marietta. "This is the darkness I warned you of. Not just a murderer, but with him." The men shuffled, their hot anger mixing with a sour, prurient curiosity. "You," Sister Albright screamed, her voice cracking. "You defile the memory of your dead husband. You shame your dead child, lying with filth, with a savage. You let him touch you. You let that thing into your bed." She was almost sobbing with her own fury. "You are a harlot, a murderer's whore." The word hung in the cold, morning air. Whore. Silas spat into the dust. "Knew it. Crazy and a whore. She's as guilty as he is." Marietta's face went bone white. She had been called a curse, a liar, a crazy woman. She had borne their whispers and their suspicion. But this was a different kind in violation. This was meant to strip her of her very humanity. She stood up slowly. The rocking chair gave a single, loud creak in the sudden silence. She looked at Sister Albright. She looked at the faces of the men. She saw their judgment, their leering, their hatred. She saw the men who had spat at her, ignored her, and now wanted to see her burn. She raised the shotgun. The sound was deafening in the enclosed yard. She fired a warning shot, not at them, but into the empty sky. The blast echoed off the hills. The horses shied, rearing and screaming. The men flinched. Jed Pike nearly fell from his saddle. In the ringing, gunpowder-laced silence, Marietta's voice cut through. It was low, cold, and trembling with a rage that had finally eclipsed her fear. "Get off my land," she said. "You crazy!" Jed Pike started, fumbling to raise his own gun. "I said, get off my land," she screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. "You want this farm? You'll have to take it, but come any closer. Come one step nearer this porch, and I will bury every last one of you. I have nothing left to lose. I promise you. I will start with him." She nodded at Jed. "And I will not stop until I am dead, or you are all in hell." The raw, primal threat, coming from the pale, thin widow, stunned them into silence. This was not the broken woman they had gossiped about in the mercantile. A gunfight was inches away. The bounty hunter was sighting Tohanu. Tohanu, in a smooth, blurred motion, was sighting the bounty hunter. Jed Pike had his gun wobbling, aimed at Marietta. "Stand down," Brody roared. "Damn it, stand down!" He looked at the bounty hunter, his face slick with sweat. "She's on her property. You got no writ for her, and your writ for him. It's for the North, not here. He's a killer. Brody, what does it matter?" the bounty hunter snarled, his eyes never leaving Tohanu. "It matters," Brody snapped. "He was a corrupt lawman, but a lawman nonetheless." He looked at Tohanu. He was remembering his stolen guns, the unlocked door. He was remembering the humiliation of that night. He wanted Tohanu dead, but I got no legal claim," Brody said, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. "Not to arrest him, not without a local warrant, and the judge gave her 60 days, firing on her now. It's murder, even for you." "It's suspicion," the bounty hunter argued. "Suspicion ain't enough to start a war, not when the judge is watching," Brody spat. He hated this. He hated her. He looked at the armed, furious widow. He looked at the silent, deadly Apache. He looked at his own shaky, drunken posse. "It ain't worth it," he grumbled. "Not today." He turned his horse, pulling it hard. "This ain't over. Marietta, this ain't over by a long shot. You enjoy your 60 days. We'll be back." The bounty hunter stared at Tohanu for one long, cold second. A look of professional assessment. He lowered his rifle. $500, he said, loud enough for every man to hear. "That's a lot of money. Someone will claim it. Maybe when you ain't looking so close. Mrs. Beth." He wheeled his horse. The crowd dispersed. Grumbling, furious, defeated, they rode away, a ragged, angry mob. Sister Albright cast one last look of utter condemnation, as if she were looking at Sodom. Marietta stood, the shotgun heavy in her arms, until the last rider was a speck of dust. Then she sat back in the rocker, her whole body shaking so hard the chair rattled on the porch boards. Tohanu put his hand on her shoulder. They had won, but the damage was done. They knew the victory was hollow. The town, denied its legal blood, would take an illegal one. They spent the day in a tense, exhausted silence. They did not celebrate. They barricaded the windows again, but they knew it was useless. The attack came just after midnight. It was not a posse. It was a coward's fire. "Marietta!" Tohanu's voice was sharp, pulling her from a shallow, fitful sleep. She woke, choking. Smoke. The cabin was clear, but the air. She ran to the door. The barn. The entire barn was a roaring tower of orange flame, lighting the yard as bright as day. So bright it looked like a second, evil sunrise. Sparks rained down on the roof of the cabin. "No!" she screamed. "The mule! The chickens!" "Stay here," Tohanu commanded, grabbing a bucket. "No!" She grabbed the other bucket, her only thought for the animals, the only living things she had left from her old life. They ran. The heat was a solid, scorching wall, pushing them back. The sound was a dragon's roar. "The mule!" she cried. The side door of the barn was not yet fully consumed. Tohanu soaked a blanket from the water trough, threw it over his head, and ran into the inferno. Marietta heard the mule braying in terror, a high, panicked sound. She ran to the chicken coop, which was beginning to smolder, the dry shingles catching sparks. She kicked the door open, screaming, waving her arms like a madwoman, driving the frantic, clucking birds out into the yard. Tohanu emerged from the smoke, dragging the mule, which was wild-eyed and singed, its mane blackened. He had done it. He had saved him. They stood, helpless, and watched the barn collapse into itself, a fountain of sparks rising to the stars. The livestock was saved, but the fire had taken everything else, all her winter supplies, the hay, the grain, her tools, the small store of food they had been saving. The farm was no longer viable. The 60 days meant nothing. They would starve here long before the law came back. The town had won. They stood in the ashes at dawn. The smoke still rose in thin, gray tendrils. The smell of wet, charred wood and burnt animal feed was the smell of utter defeat. Marietta stared at the ruin. She was not crying. She was empty. They did not leave us anything, she whispered. Tohanu came to her side. He was covered in soot. Marietta. She looked up. He was already looking toward the northern hills. The canyon, she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. Yes, we must go now, before they come back to see their work. She nodded. The fight was over. The farm was a grave. They packed what little they had. It was not much. They loaded the mule with the remaining food from the cabin, a side of bacon, a half sack of flour, some salt. They took her blankets, her water pitcher, and the small tin of salve. Marietta went into the cabin for the last time. She looked at the hearth where he had recovered. She looked at the bed where they had made love in the daylight. She went to the windowsill and took the small, carved lizard. She slipped it deep into her apron pocket. Then, she went to the old trunk. She dug past Elias's clothes. She found her wedding ring. She had stopped wearing it months ago, her hands too calloused and swollen from work. She walked out, past Tohanu, past the mule. She walked up the small hill behind the cabin, to the 2 small, wooden crosses, Elias, Samuel. The weeds had grown high around the stones. She knelt, her hand touching the rough, weathered wood of her son's cross. "Elias," she whispered, the wind taking her words. I am sorry. I am sorry for all of it, for my part." She looked at the ring in her hand, the thin gold band. I tried. I tried to stay, but they won't let me, and She looked over her shoulder. Tohanu was waiting, patient, his back to her, giving her this last, private moment. I want to live, she whispered, the confession tearing at her. A final, painful truth. I want to live. She dug a small hole with her fingers, in the dark earth between the 2 graves. She placed the wedding ring in the hole. She was not Mrs. Beth anymore. She was not the widow. She was Marietta. "Forgive me," she whispered, as she covered the ring with dirt. "Forgive me for wanting to live." She stood up. She did not look back. She walked to Tohanu. He looked at her, saw the dirt on her hands, the finality in her eyes. He said nothing. He just handed her the mule's lead. She mounted. He walked beside her. They did not take the road. They cut north, toward the high, rocky wilderness, toward the hidden canyon. They fled through the desert under the pale light of the moon, leaving the smoking ruin of her past behind. They were chased by dust. They were chased by ghosts. And they were chased by the faint, far-off smell of gunpowder. The high desert was a furnace. They had fled the farm with what they could carry. But the land north of Jericho Creek was a different kind of enemy. It was not a violent, sudden malice, but a slow, patient, crushing indifference. There was no trail, only a path Tohanu seemed to read in the stones and the sparse, thorny brush. He led them through dry arroyos and over rocky mesas, keeping to the shadows of the canyons, avoiding the high, open ground. The sun was a white-hot eye, and it found them, their water, carried in the pitcher and 2 canteens, was gone by the 3rd day. Marietta's lips cracked. Her tongue felt thick, a useless piece of dry wood in her mouth. The mule, overburdened and old, began to falter. Its head hung low, its breath a dry, ragged wheeze. "We have to rest him," Marietta whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "We rest. We do not move," Tohanu said, his own face grim, his lips a thin, pale line. "We must find water." He was looking for signs, for the faintest trace of green, for the flight of a bird toward a hidden spring, but the land was barren. It was a world baked clean. On the fourth day, the mule stumbled. It went to its knees, the pack shifting, the pans and blankets clattering. Tohanu tried to pull it up, but the animal was spent. It lay on its side, its thin legs kicking once, a final, shuddering sigh escaping its lungs. Then it was still. Marietta looked at the mule, the last living link to her old life, dead in the red dust. She felt nothing. She was too empty, too thirsty, to even grieve. "We take what we can," Tohanu said. He unstrapped the pack, the flour, the bacon, the blankets. He divided the load between them. It was impossibly heavy. They left the mule. The buzzards were circling before they were even out of sight. They walked. The world dissolved into a shimmering, blinding heat. Marietta focused on Tohanu's back. That was all that existed. The dusty, mended cotton of Elias's shirt, moving steadily, one step at a time. She did not know when she fell. The ground just came up to meet her. She felt the sharp pain of rocks against her knees and hands. And then, a strange, floating peace. She heard Tohanu's voice, a long way off. He was saying her name. She was so hot, she was burning. She tried to tell him, but her tongue was too heavy. The world went dark, and then it returned. But it was wrong. It was night, but she was still burning. She was moving. She was on his back. He was carrying her. His arms were hooked under her knees, her own arms draped weakly around his neck. She could feel the sweat on his skin, the agonizing slow bunch and release of his muscles as he walked. He was carrying her, and the pack. "Tohanu," she whispered. "Be still." He grunted. The words were forced, an agony of effort. "We are close. It's so bright," she murmured. The stars. They were not the soft, distant stars of the plains. They were sharp, cold diamonds. So close she could touch them. They were wheeling, spinning, making her dizzy. She saw a face in the stars, a small, round face, with wide, curious eyes. "Samuel," she breathed, a sigh of pure joy. "Look, it's Samuel. He's laughing." She tried to reach for him, her hand weak, grasping at the empty air. "My boy, my baby." Tohanu stopped. He stood, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. He did not set her down. He just stood, letting her gaze at the empty sky. It's all right, baby," she whispered to the stars. Mama's coming." "No." Tohanu's voice was a raw command, breaking through her delirium. "You are not." He shifted her weight, turning his head, his face close to hers. She could feel his hot breath. "You are not leaving," he swore. "You will stay. You will live. I will keep you alive. Do you hear me? I will keep you." He kissed her forehead. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a brand, a rough, salty, desperate seal of a promise made against all hope. He was branding her, claiming her from the ghosts. She closed her eyes. The face in the stars was gone. When she woke, she was lying on cool, damp earth. The world was green. She blinked. The light was soft, filtered through the leaves of a cottonwood tree. She heard water, the sound of a stream, trickling over rocks. She sat up. Her head swam. She was weak, but the burning fever was gone. Tohanu was kneeling by the stream, his hands cupped, drinking. She looked around. They were in a place that should not exist. It was a high-walled canyon, a deep, verdant scar in the middle of the red desert. A clear, narrow stream ran down the center, feeding a small, lush meadow. The walls were sheer rock, shielding the canyon floor from the worst of the wind and sun. It was safe. "Where?" she whispered. He looked over, his face haggard with exhaustion. but his eyes were alive. "The canyon," he said. "My ancestors, they came here. When they fled, it is a place to hide, a place to be." He brought her water in his cupped hands. It was the sweetest, coldest water she had ever tasted. It was the taste of life. They stayed by the stream for 3 days, doing nothing but drinking and sleeping and eating small portions of their food. The life flowed back into her. The strength returned to him. On the 4th day, they began to build. There was a shallow cave at the base of the north-facing cliff, a place where the rock had been hollowed out by wind and time. It was a natural shelter. Tohanu used the rocks from the stream bed and the red clay from the bank to build a low wall, closing in the front, leaving a space for a door and a small opening for smoke. He wove a roof of willow branches and packed it with sod. It was not a cabin. It was a den, a hovel, but it was theirs. Marietta took the few, precious seeds she had grabbed from the cabin, seeds she had saved from her own meager garden, corn, beans, and squash. She found a patch of soft, black earth near the stream, and she planted them. She used a sharp stick to dig, her hands pressing the seeds into the soil like she was tucking children into bed, while she tended the small, hopeful patch of dirt. Tohanu hunted. He did not use the rifle. The sound was too loud, a betrayal of their hidden peace. He used the snares he had brought, and he fished. He would stand in the stream, his patience as deep as the rock, and spear small, silver-backed fish with a sharpened stick. Slowly, peace began to grow. It was not the joy of that one afternoon, but something deeper, quieter. It was the peace of purpose, the peace of survival. They fell into a rhythm. She would mend. She would forage for edible greens. She would tend her tiny garden. He would hunt. He would fish. He would reinforce their small home. They spoke, but not of the past. The past was a burned-out farm and a line of graves. They spoke of the now. "The corn is up," she would say, her voice quiet, as they sat by their small, smokeless fire at night. "The deer are moving south. We will have meat for winter," he would reply. Their nights were a new kind of intimacy. They held each other, their bodies pressed together on the pallet of blankets inside the small, dark shelter. It was not the desperate collision of their first nights, nor the tender, aching discovery of the lodge. It was simpler. It was a raw, fundamental need. It was the need for warmth against the high desert cold. It was the need for a living, breathing body beside you in the dark. It was the need to know that you were not, after all, alone in the world. They were two halves of a whole, clinging together, not out of lust, but out acts of necessity. They talked, their voices low in the darkness of their shelter. They talked about creating something new. We could make this a home," she whispered one night, her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. "A real home. No one can take this from us. It is good land," he murmured, his hand in her hair. "The water is sweet. It is enough. It is enough." She agreed. They lived this way for a month. 2, the corn grew high. The summer began to fade. Marietta felt a sense of peace she had not known since she was a girl. The ghosts were still there. Samuel's face still swam in her memory. But they were quiet. They had stayed back at the farm. One late afternoon, they heard it. Horses, not the heavy shod hooves of a posse. The lighter, quicker steps of unshod ponies, coming up the hidden, winding trail that led to the canyon. Tohanu was on his feet in an instant. The peace was shattered. He grabbed the rifle. He pulled Marietta behind him, into the mouth of their cave. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not make a sound." He moved to the rocks at the entrance of the canyon, a shadow among shadows. Marietta watched, her heart a cold stone in her chest. A lone rider appeared. He was young, barely a man, perhaps 17 or 18. He was Apache. He was thin, his face etched with hunger, but his eyes were bright and proud. He sat on his pony, his gaze sweeping the canyon, taking in the small, walled-up cave, the patch of green corn, the wisp of smoke. He raised one hand, palm out, a sign of peace. Tohanu stepped out from the rocks, the rifle held low, but ready. The youth's eyes widened. He stared at Tohanu, not with fear, but with a kind of awe. He slid from his pony. He spoke, his voice low, the words in his own tongue, a language Marietta could not understand. Tohanu's body, which had been coiled tight, relaxed. He lowered the rifle. He answered the boy, his voice a low rumble. They spoke for a long time. The boy spoke with urgency, his hands moving, his words sharp, pleading. Tohanu listened. He was stone, his face revealing nothing. But Marietta, who had learned to read the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, saw that the words were hitting him like blows. Finally, the boy stopped. He waited. Tohanu said one short thing. The boy nodded, his face grim. He mounted his pony, gave one last, respectful look at Tohanu, and rode back out of the canyon, disappearing as quickly as he had come. Tohanu stood alone for a long time, staring at the empty trail. He returned to the shelter. He sat by the fire, but he was not there. He was 1,000 miles away. He picked up a piece of pine, his knife appearing in his hand, and he began to shave strips of wood. His movements automatic, violent. "What is it?" Marietta asked, her voice trembling. "What did he want?" Tohanu did not look up. The knife moved faster. "Shave, shave, shave. They are my people," he said, his voice thick. "What is left? Not a tribe, just scraps. Old men, women, children, hiding in the mountains, starving. How did he find you? The stories, from the north, the soldiers, the ones I killed for my sister, the bounty hunters I evaded. They think I am a protector, a ghost. They think I am a legend." He spat the word, as if it were poison. He looked up, and his eyes were hollowed out, haunted by a weight she could not understand. "They want me to lead them." Marietta's blood went cold. She had known, deep down, that this peace was borrowed. "Lead them?" "Where?" she whispered. "To fight, to be a people again. They think I can guide them. They think I can save them." The terrible, impossible choice was laid bare between them. His people, or her. His past, or their future. Marietta felt the world, their small, perfect, hidden world, begin to tear apart. She could lose him. After all this, after the fire, and the flight, and the sickness, she could lose him. Not to a bounty hunter, but to a ghost, to a legend. She could have begged. She could have screamed. She could have reminded him of his promise. But she looked at his face. She saw the torment. She saw the man who had kissed her scars, who had carried her through the desert, who had refused to be a monster. And she knew she could not be one, either. She could not hold him. She knelt in front of him, her hands on her knees. Her voice was steady, though it cost her everything. "If you go," she said, her eyes locked on his, "I will be here. I will wait. I will tend the corn. I will wait." He stopped carving. The knife was still. But if you stay," she whispered, her voice finally breaking, a single tear tracing a line through the dust on her cheek. "If you stay, this can be our home." She had laid her own choice at his feet. She had not trapped him. She had given him a home, not a cage. He looked at her, at the tear, at the strength in her. He looked at the fire. He looked at the knife in his hand. He did not speak. That night, she thought he would be gone. She lay on their pallet, her back to the entrance, her eyes squeezed shut, listening for the sound of him leaving. She listened for hours. She did not hear him go. She woke, just before dawn, to the smell of wood smoke and the sound of a knife, scraping softly. She sat up. He was sitting by the fire, his back to her, his shoulders set. He had not slept. He was still there. He had stayed. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and went to him, sitting on the ground, her head resting on his shoulder. He did not tense. He accepted her weight. She looked at what he was carving. It was not a lizard. It was not a weapon. In his hands, He was slowly, carefully, with painstaking detail, shaping the piece of pine. He was carving a cradle. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West and let us know your thoughts on the story in English.